Good evening, everyone. My name is C.K. Hoffer, and I have the pleasure of serving as the 78th President of the National Bar Association. This year, because of the richness of our membership and because of the need to make sure that we say thank you to those incredible members of the bar that have done so much for their state, for their communities, and for this country, we've instituted a program of recognizing living legends. And I reflect on what my grandmother and my mother always told me, which is recognize me or recognize people when they're living, when they've done extraordinary things, because we all have to transition. And when we transition, we will never know how important or how significant our contributions are sometimes until people tell us. And so it's within that tradition, the rich tradition of the NBA, that we are recognizing living legends. And at this town hall meeting, Region 4 town hall meeting, we are recognizing one living legend, and that is David Green. He is the General Counsel of the National Bar Association. He has been phenomenal for the bar. He has helped to elevate the bar this year. I've known David Green since law school. We jokingly talk about our ages, but the reality is he's much older than me, probably by about a decade or so, even though we were in law school together, but he's an extraordinary individual. He's an extraordinary professor. He's been an extraordinary dean, a former prosecutor. He clerked for a federal judge, Judge Penn, and he's just quite simply, ladies and gentlemen, all that we wish to be as lawyers of the National Bar Association. His integrity, his diligence, and his authenticity are simply unparalleled. And so I just had to take a moment of personal privilege since he has served as the General Counsel of the National Bar Association during my bar year, and I have listened to him. I've followed his guidance. We have talked about many, many issues, but at the end of the day, as you all know, for those of you who are on the Board of Governors, when our General Counsel speaks and advises the bar, I listen because that is the way it should be. I also wanted to recognize the extraordinary efforts, as always, of Jamie Boston, who's chair of the division of the National Bar, or the section that deals with veteran affairs and military affairs. Every single program that has been presented where we salute our men and women who serve this country honorably every single day to protect our way of justice, our freedom in this country. And even though this country is not perfect, and Lord knows we have a lot of work to do in the areas of policing reform, voter suppression, and COVID-19, the three areas we focused on here this year during my bar year, this country is safe, this country is secure, this country is what it is in its glory because of the brave men and women every single day that serve this country honorably in the military. And so without further ado, I'm going to bring on the chaplain of the National Bar Association, the Honorable Judge Sonia Natasha Brown, who is here in the Atlanta metropolitan area. She too is an extraordinary trial lawyer, dedicated servant leader, serves our community, having been a past president of GABWA, the Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys, chaired also our foundation in this community. She is a legend unto herself. And so I just want to bring on our magnificent chaplain, Judge Brown.
Thank you, Madam President. It is always such a privilege and a pleasure to be in your presence, in the presence of greatness of all the members of the National Bar Association. So with that, let us go to the throne of God in prayer. Oh, most gracious and wonderful Father, we come to you on this day giving thanks. Thank you for allowing us to see this day. Thank you for giving us breath in our bodies. Oh, as we come today, we pray for blessings upon this town hall. We pray in particular those who serve our country, who put their lives on the front line so that we have an opportunity to commit to the service that we do. We thank you for their bravery. We thank you for the commitment. We thank you for the sacrifices that they, along with their families, make. We thank you for those who stand among us as giants, as living legends. We thank you for our General Counsel, Attorney Green, for all that he has done, all that he means, and all that he will continue to do for the National Bar Association, and for all of those upon whose shoulders that we stand, We thank you for their leadership. We thank you that they put themselves in positions that open doors for each one of us to be able to walk through. And we commit that we will continue to do the work, continue to run the race for which we have been called, to make sure that we honor them and that we give them their due and glorify them for the work that they have done. And now I pray that your presence will be here amongst us, that you will bless all those who will speak and allow those who will be listening to receive all of the information and knowledge that will be imparted today. It is in the name of your Son that we pray. Amen.
Amen. If I could just take one moment and introduce a young lady, and I will say young lady, an extraordinary young woman, and that is the regional director of Region 4, and that's Sean Magruder. We just have to, when we think of Sean, we think of excellence. When we think of Sean, we think of diligence. When we think of Sean, we think of talent. And we think of Sean, we want to thank her for her service to the National Bar Association as regional director. Sean?
Thank you so very much. I really appreciate that introduction. So very gracious. I really want to spend a little bit of time, introducing Jamie Boston. So Jamie Boston is actually Louis J. Boston. He is a graduate in political science from the Johns Hopkins University in 1997. And then he's also a graduate of the Washington College of Law in 2000. Now, in between the two, he was granted an educational delay to attend law school because he had received his commission as a second lieutenant in the US Army through the ROTC. So he has served both domestically and abroad. He served in Iraqi freedom, he served in KC Korea, and he's done criminal and civil law as a judge advocate. On state side, he served in Fort Lee, Virginia, and in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, all in Region 4, and he's well decorated. After his retirement from the Army, Jamie was the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Maryland, where he served as a prosecutor in the Organized Crime Unit. And he's currently an Associate Counsel in the Office of General Law for the U.S. the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, where he practices information law. He is active in the Maryland Bar. He's active in the ABA, but we're really excited because he is and has been for the past 12 years the chair of the Veterans Affairs and Military Law section. And that's something that we really appreciate him doing over so many years. And he is, like I said, equally active in the American Bar Association. So he makes us proud, by taking his talents throughout the legal community in the United States. He's married and the father of 2 beautiful little girls. And he is a lifetime member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. So please join me in welcoming Jamie Boston and the wonderful panel that he's put together through his outstanding efforts.
Thanks, Sean, for that great introduction. Longer than I expected. It's not about me today, but thank you. Also, one correction: it's Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, not AKA. No disrespect.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I appreciate it. I'm sure Captain Sanders enjoyed that little slip there, but that's quite fine. But no, thank you, Sean. And Sean, I just want to say thank you to you and putting this together. This was done pretty quickly, to be honest with everybody. So this is not our typical long program that some of you might have visited. But we wanted to help the NBA out and also help the region out, you in particular, to do something. And so as we like to serve, we're serving now. So thank you for the opportunity and all that you've done for this year. And of course, to Madam President for your leadership for the year. It's been outstanding. I can't believe we're almost at the end of it, but you have taken the NBA to a new level. And I truly appreciate both your leadership and your friendship over the year and before. So thank you very much. With that said, everybody, I'm not going to take up much time. This is going to be about an hour-long presentation. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, this is not going to be our typical, those who've come to our panels before, a typical panel discussion. We tend to get a little lively sometimes. This one might be a little more on the academic side, but nevertheless, we still encourage you to ask questions and get involved. We like to make it more interactive as possible, but we just kind of want to lay things out. And so if you look at the title of our program today, it's an introduction. We plan to do a more in-depth program later on in the fall, but it's introduction to legal authorities of the military force in the homeland. And so some of you might be asking, well, shoot, what does this have to do with, you know, Region 4? And more importantly, why does it even matter? Well, I'll tell you why it matters. A couple of things. First, Region 4 houses majority of our military strength in terms of our leadership, i.e. the Pentagon, Central Intelligence Agency, and we can go on and on. So it's very pertinent and relative, or it makes sense rather, that we would do a program related to military authority coming out of Region 4. But more importantly, closer to home, why does this even matter? And I'll submit a couple things to you. First, we just celebrated a national holiday for the first time, Juneteenth. And those of you who haven't taken the time to study Juneteenth, in particular, the Emancipation Proclamation, which as a law student, I don't know about the rest of you all, I was never forced to read as a law student. And I just read it recently because I thought it was important to really understand it. I've read parts, but never the whole thing. And when you look at that document, to kind of bring this home, you will see in there that the reason behind the Emancipation Proclamation, I'm sure scholars will debate me on this, but I would submit to you, the reason was because of it was a military necessity. It was not about freeing the slaves, although that might have been a part of it. But when you look at the document itself and read the document, it says we're doing this essentially because it's a military necessity. So why does that matter, and how does that relate to this particular program? We have to stop taking for granted, one, that freedom is free and that freedom is not fragile. And in order to do that, we must be educated about what presidents, Congress, whoever it may be, what they can and can't do in relation to military force. And so we thought it'd be important to educate not just MBA lawyers, but anybody who's joining us today, hopefully we have non-lawyers on here, to educate them about what the truth really is and what the law really says. So that way, when you're watching whatever network you might choose, whatever it is, you can separate the truth from the fiction. And upon that, we will build, like I said, later on in the fall, and have a more in-depth discussion, because this is a very hot button issue. It can go in all kinds of directions, from race to social economic issues and across the board. And so we wanted to take this time, again, to give you an introduction. And I promise you, we have two outstanding people to start that introduction to this topic. And with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce them. So give me a second. So first, we have Major Tia Hooper. She's U.S. Air Force JAG. Major Justina, or otherwise known as Tia Hooper, is the Deputy Legal Counsel, Office of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon. She provides legal advice through legal counsel to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in his capacity as the principal military advisor to the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council. Major Hooper also advises the Joint Staff Directorate and the combatant commands on international operations, national security law issues. Major Hooper's portfolio includes Western Hemisphere operations, homeland defense and civil support and civil disturbance, counter unmanned aerial systems, integrated operations. Major Hooper entered the Air Force in 2011 through the Direct Commissioning Program, and then from 2013 to 2014, she deployed to Kabul, Afghanistan. She is a Bronze Star awardee, among other awards. She has served across the globe and has admitted practice law before the Supreme Court of California, the U.S. Supreme Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces, and the Air Force Court of Criminal Appeals. Our second panelist today is Dr. Robert A. Sanders. Dr. Sanders is a retired U.S. Navy Judge Advocate General Corps captain, a legal national security educator, a former federal government organization counsel, and private industry military communications and weapons systems engineer. For more than 2 years, or 2 decades rather, he developed the critical thinking of diverse groups of global leaders and supported the international human rights, international law, military, and diplomatic objectives of the United States. He has served as a staff attorney and legislative director, working with the U.S. Senate and U.S. House of Representatives, as a federal defense counsel, and as a federal criminal prosecutor and defense counsel in the U.S., afloat on Navy ships and abroad. He was previously a U.S. Naval War College military law and operations professor and has held numerous leadership positions in the Navy JAG. Dr. Sanders has served on several boards of directors, including prior service on the Rhode Island Black Heritage Society Board, on the U.S. Secretary of Defense Recovering Wounded, Ill, and Injured Members of the Armed Forces Task Force, and currently he's a professor at the University of New Haven in National Security Law. And I think I messed that title up. Sorry, Dr. Sanders, you can elaborate on that. But ladies and gentlemen, we have two outstanding people. I will just say that, you know, I'm very proud of my section and what we've done this year. And sometimes we kind of fly on the radar because that's what we do. We can't talk about a lot of things that we've done, But I will tell you, I'm very proud to say that as a former JAG myself, and as these two people represent, these are outstanding lawyers and servants to this country. The things they have done, the things that we have done, most of you will ever know about, but they are in the room of where power happens. And so these are the people that can truly explain what's going on this issue. So again, thank you for everybody attending, and thank you to our panelists. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Tia.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and good evening, everyone. First, I'd just like to start by saying that I am speaking on behalf of myself, and there's no federal endorsement. I'm not representing the Department of Defense, Department of the Air Force, or the Office of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In this, I am simply providing my own opinions and analysis. So with that,
Sorry, Tia, let me add, that goes for everybody here. We're all speaking on our own individual capacity, not in representation of the federal government or any particular service branch or entity. So sorry, thanks.
no, thanks, Jamie. Yeah, so the title of our panel tonight is You Can't Do That. And that really comes from a lot of people in the last year have said, how is the military being utilized in these ways? And so we would just like to give you some information about the authorities and how they actually apply. So as a general rule, the Department of Defense does not conduct domestic operations in today's legal construct. It's actually the job of the Department of Homeland Security. However, the Department of Defense can assist in what we call defense support of civil authorities. And that is the exception to the general rule. Now, the first thing that everybody needs to understand is, and that's also a little bit confusing, is that the rules and laws of domestic operations are different depending on the actual status of the military member. And as you can see from this picture, we are all wearing the same uniform. So it would be very hard to distinguish somebody who is active duty versus National Guard versus a reservist. I myself, military member for 10 years, if I just saw a lineup of military personnel, I could not distinguish them because our uniforms are uniformed. But there is a distinction that we need to talk about here tonight. And we're going to start with the source document, right? That being the United States Constitution. And you can see in the preamble how it describes the purpose of the United States. This is to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, and promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty in ourselves, to ourselves and our posterity. A couple of the phrases in the preamble that I really want you to focus on is this idea of ensuring domestic tranquility and provide for the common defense. You'll see how the laws that we'll discuss here tonight are built off of those concepts, which will bring us to Article 1 of the United States Constitution, which describes Congress's powers. And down here, you'll see that Congress has the power to provide for and calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Additionally, Congress has the authority to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed. And I want you guys to understand this, we'll talk about it a little bit more. But when it says employed in the service of the United States, and then it says reserving to the states respectively the authority to appoint officers, the authority to train their militias according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. And that really brings us to this idea of what is it when somebody is actually serving under the United States, or if they're serving in a militia status. So right now, I'm gonna just describe the different statuses that a military member can be in. And then Captain Sanders is going to discuss how the law pertains to each military member based on their status. But first, there are two statutes that I just want to point out. The first is the Stafford Act, which actually allows the Department of Defense to help another federal agency or a state in a natural disaster or an emergency that's declared by the president. Typically, you'll see this in a situation where when the Department of Defense is helping with FEMA. Additionally, there's the Economy Act, which actually authorizes federal agencies to help each other on a reimbursable basis. So those are the two acts that the Department of Defense utilizes to actually help agencies in a domestic situation. So our first status that we're going to consider here tonight is called state active duty status. The purpose of a state mission is what's going to drive a member being in active duty status. The law will be based on that state's code, The chain of command will start with the governor and then the adjutant general of that state. The governor is the person who will actually mobilize the state guard and the state active duty status. The funding comes from the state. And a couple examples that I'm sure people are familiar with is the Camp Fire that started in California in 2018. The military members that you saw supporting that mission, along with the military members you saw supporting the mission of the Ferguson riots in 2014, were National Guard members. So even though they wore the uniform, they weren't actually acting under the command and control of the United States. They were acting under the command and control of the state. The next status is called the National Guard, also referred to as Title 32. Now, the purpose of a mission when somebody is going to be in the National Guard, it's a state purpose. And when I say purpose, I mean it's a state issue, right? So it's not a federal issue. But whatever the issue is, it has become too tenuous for the state to handle it themselves. And so the governor can request help from the Department of Defense, in which case the state active duty members will then become National Guard members in a Title 32 status. The chain of command will stay with the governor, but the mobilization aspect will come from the Secretary of Defense with the governor's consent, and it will be paid for through federal funds. You've seen examples like this with Hurricane Katrina, and then right now with COVID-19. A good example is, if you've seen in the news, the Department of Defense is helping the HHS, the Human Health and Services, with the distribution plan for COVID-19, and they're doing that in a Title 32 status as opposed to a state active duty status. Additionally, we have active duty. I think this is what most people think of when they think of a military member, and that's what I am. I'm active duty Title 10, which means that the purpose for me engaging in any type of operation needs to be a federal purpose. And we follow that follows from Title 10 of the United States Code. The chain of command will be the president or the Secretary of Defense. The president, and then the Secretary of Defense will actually authorize the orders. And then the mobilization occurs from the president to the Secretary of Defense to the commander of NORTHCOM, whose area of responsibility is the continental United States. The funding will come from federal funding. And then a couple of examples where the Title 10 forces might be utilized in domestic operation is a national emergency, or the Insurrection Acts, or through the Insurrection Act, through riots that occur. And Captain Sanders is going to describe that a bit more. There is also another aspect for utilizing the National Guard, and that is if the purpose is a federal mission, but we're going to utilize the National Guard members with the consent of the governors concerned. In this situation, they will be considered Title 32 of the United States Code. The governor will stay in their chain of command. It will be funded with federal dollars, and a couple examples are the post 9/11 airport security. The members who were providing that support in each specific state were National Guard members, but they were serving a federal function. Additionally, the Southwest border, and then the 2020 unrest that occurred in Washington, D.C. All of those members were in a Title 32 status when they were actually performing those missions. And that brings us to the District of Columbia, which is unique in a lot of sense. The first being, right, is that it's not a state. So it's kind of hard to use the same example that I used previously when it comes to the governor being the one that consents. For DC, under DC Code 49406, the president is actually the commander-in-chief of the DC National Guard. So you don't have a governor to actually fill that role as it pertains to the DC National Guard. And instead, the president has delegated his authority to the Secretary of Defense, who then delegated it to the Secretary of the Army. And there is a commanding general of the DC National Guard. And they are considered to be more so in a Title 32 status versus a Title 10 status. So that's what you will find for the National Guard of DC. Now, what makes this confusing in DC specifically is that the mayor of DC does not have authority over the DC National Guard. So when entities like the Metro Police or the District of Columbia Protective Service Division, when they need help, they can't just go pull the National Guard the way that a state governor could do in their respective states. Additionally, you have entities like the United States Park Police, the United States Capitol Police, the United States Secret Service. There are so many entities within law enforcement entities within the district who can call upon the Department of Defense for help by asking for the DC National Guard to come out. This concept of the difference between state active duty, National Guard, and then active duty serving under the United States was solidified, that being the separateness of each aspect in the US Supreme Court case Perpich versus the Department of Defense, where the court said that all persons who are ordered into the active military service of the United States, that being Title 10, are relieved from duty in the National Guard, that being Title 32. So they cannot be in the same status at any given time. And I think a pertinent part of this particular opinion is where it says all of them now must keep 3 hats in their closet: a civilian hat, a state militia hat, and an Army hat. And when it's referring to the Army here, it's referring to service of the United States. And again, only one of which is worn at any particular time. So as we kind of go through this discussion, we want to give you the background on the statuses, and then now Captain Sanders will discuss how the laws actually pertain based on the member's status. Captain Sanders, over to you.
Thank you, Tia. So one of the things that Tia mentioned was how the laws restrict and enhance and support the military working in those state and that federal status. But the military, because of the history of the United States, we are a nation that was founded on separation of church and state, but also founded upon a desire to not have a large standing military because of the fear that a large standing military gave us. Hence the institution of militias brought forward from when the United States was not a nation, but was a colony, and it needed armed forces that the British at the time weren't providing to protect themselves against the other Europeans who wanted to colonize America, or what came to be America, to hold the enslaved in place, and to remove Indians from the land that they wanted to possess. That was the original status of those militias. Of course, today, my reading of what a militia is under the Second Amendment of the Constitution is that a militia is a state or a federalized entity, as Tia just discussed. So next slide, please. And we're going to talk about, in this process, the Public Commons House Act and the Insurrection Act, and we're going to go deeper into those. But I want you to remember some of the things that Tia just talked about. That first part, that preamble, what it says, what the intent is. Next, who's going to do it? Well, in certain cases, calling forth the militia to do that, to suppress insurrections, to, at the time, to continue to protect without a standing army from European invasions or other insurrections inside the United States. You may not know it, but the individual, Aaron Burr, a former vice president who killed Alexander Hamilton himself, was an insurrectionist. He led an insurrection, or at least was tried for leading an insurrection, to take over what we became the Louisiana Territory of New Orleans after the time in which he had killed Alexander Hamilton. So this is not a new thing. It's a very old thing, but it's been applied to us now in many different ways. You also looked at what Tia talked about, organizing and arming. So there's who's in control, who has the ability to tell the military, the militia, either or the active duty, what they can do and where they can do it. Also, Tia talked about the difference in why the District of Columbia is the way it is in these functions. And that last paragraph is the key point to that. Because the seat of government was placed inside the District of Columbia, it was given a separate status, unlike the other 13 colonies which became states. Next slide, please. So why are we here? What are we really concerned with? Well, we're concerned when the DOD is called to show up at what some may call an insurrection. Someone else might call it an uprising. Someone else might call it a riot. Others may say it was protest. Some may say it's just a normal day when people who were visiting the Capitol, like on January 6th, were tourists. So you be the judge of that. And we'll talk about that a little bit and go a little bit deeper into what this looks like from the DOD side when they show up and have to deal with it. Next slide, please. So an insurrection is defined in US Code, Title 18, the Criminal Code of US Code under 2383. And it says, incites on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid and comfort to those who are doing the same. So you can look at these pictures from a particular event that many have labeled as an insurrection. Some refuse to do that, and make your own decision. We'll find out specifically, as some individuals are tried for the January 6th activities, whether or not that code was violated, and of course, fine or imprisonment are imposed. Another key piece to this is if you are found guilty of participating or supporting insurrection, you are then deemed ineligible to hold office in the United States for the remainder of your life. So key things are happening around this that involve what the military had to do, what they didn't have to do on those days. Matter of fact, one of the reservists who was called up, National Guardsman who was called up, was one of my students who was a member of the Rhode Island National Guard, called to active duty, posted to DC on the morning of January the 7th. Next slide, please. So as a professor of national security, without my JAG lawyer title for a second, what are we really talking about here? So this is a demonstration of what we're talking about. We're talking about the left end of this scale. Now you could go all the way over to peace and take it on in the way that a famous poet, Gil Scott-Heron, when he defined what peace was, or you can go all the way to the other side in war. And of course, total war, the most devastating of war would be nuclear war. We're not over there. We're to the left of the screen at the peace end. But when the military is asked to step into this void, the military is coming in when ordinary crimes and riots are no longer able to be suppressed by civil authority. The governors make those decisions, the legislature, make those decisions that they are no longer able to suppress the disturbance, whatever form you may want to characterize it to be, and call for federal support. So we're somewhere in that, moved into other sporadic violence and short of internal, non-international armed conflict. So we're somewhere in there in a scalable manner. But you'll notice that there's lots of law that applies across the board during this period. We're going to talk about a couple of statutes in particular. Next slide, please. So our fear of the military, that manifests itself in what is euphemistically called the PCA or the Posse Comitatus Act. It essentially outlaws the military, in particular the Army, and Tia may like or not like this, a rib of the Army, the Air Force, because the Air Force was the Army Air Corps until the National Security Act made it the Air Force. So all of those laws that applied to the Army rolled over to apply to the Air Force. And constitutionally, Posse Comitatus said hey, you guys are not authorized to do civilian law functions in the United States unless something special happens. Now, of course, the statute didn't include the Navy and the Marine Corps, so there's a separate defense instruction, which is cited here, and a separate 10 U.S. code inside the DoD structures that allow for these same Posse Comitatus Act provisions to be morphed over to the Navy and the Marine Corps. So the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps and Air Force are covered by this act and cannot execute civilian law enforcement activities. I don't know what the answer is for the Space Force. Well, I guess we'll have to find out. But one of the other crucial and very important parts of this is the Coast Guard's not covered because the Coast Guard actually is a law enforcement entity. They have law enforcement authority and can act so in the waters and on the lands of the United States and out to the areas that we euphemistically call wetland, which is in that 12 nautical miles from the coast. All the things Tia just mentioned in terms of the State Guard, those things under Title 32, or in a state active duty status, they make those individuals exempt from the Posse Comitatus Act. So they can act in what we would consider civilian law enforcement activities and functions. Next slide, please. Now, this is basically a summary of what Tia just went over. Another look at it. We won't go into any depth, but it fleshes out exactly what she laid out, but sticks it into the construct of the Posse Comitatus Act. Next slide, please. And now we get to the meat here, the Insurrection Act. So this authorizes the president to use all available force, including active duty military and federalized guard members under Title 10, as Tia explained, there's different status, Title 10, Title 32, to reinstate federal authority to suppress a rebellion or insurrection. It's been used multiple times over the years, and it's not been used multiple times over the years. Why it's used and not used is because this particular activity, while supporting law enforcement, is also a political decision whether to invoke the Insurrection Act. You may have read earlier in the week that during the Black Lives Matter protests in Washington, D.C. last year, the president met with the Secretary of Defense, Tia's boss, and a couple other people to talk about invoking the Insurrection Act. And he was talked out of doing so. But unbeknownst to some people, his then civilian aides around him then wrote the proclamation that will be required to invoke the act and put it on the shelf for a just in case, not respective of the advice and guidance he received from the leaders of the American military. Now, before this happens, the president must issue a proclamation under 10 U.S.C. 254. That proclamation basically tells everybody to stand down or stand back, or however you want to put it, and conform to the authorities in their jurisdiction. And if they don't, the president can instantaneously invoke the Insurrection Act and move forward. Next slide, please. So what's that look like? So the first way it can happen is to aid the state governor at a request, as Tia talked about earlier, from the state. Now, it doesn't have to just come from the governor. It could actually come from the legislature as well. Maybe the governor's been held prisoner and he can't act. The legislature can ask for federal help. An example was the governor of California in 1992 during the Los Angeles riots or insurrections or whatever you want to call them, after the acquittal of the officers who assaulted Rodney King, the California National Guard was federalized. That means they were brought into that Title 10 status and deployed to restore order. Now, we're thinking about the Guard, and remember, they can't do that police activity. Well, the chief exception to posse comitatus is the Insurrection Act. This is where they can act. Next slide, please. Another way is to enforce federal law. So if there is some type of unlawful objection or assemblage or rebellion against US authority, then under Section 252, the president can, over the objections of a state governor, bring in active duty forces or federalize the militia. An example of this was President Reagan. There was a disruption at a federal penitentiary in Atlanta. The local authorities were not able to suppress the riots. The president then said he would federalize the National Guard in Georgia and send them in to put down the disturbances. Prior to them actually arriving, the local authorities gained control, and so it never went fully through. But the president has that authority to use the militia to enforce federal authority. Another way of enforcing federal authority, next slide, please, is when there's an interference with state or federal law. Now, this is can be a positive, as opposed to taking an action against the citizens of a particular locale. It could be an action to support them. So, for instance, when President Eisenhower sent the 101st Airborne Division active duty troops, along with the federalized Arkansas National Guard, to support the Little Rock Nine, to allow them to enter Little Rock High School and begin to proceed to receive an education under the desegregation orders of Brown v. Board of Education. So there's a positive and negative. Now you can also see by the depiction to the right of this information that there's lots of times when it would have been a wonderful thing to see an Insurrection Act happen, invoked by a president in an area that would be supportive of 14th Amendment rights to equal protection. They didn't happen in those cases, but we can look to the future and think that maybe kind of we can get there as well. And we have an avenue in this act to do so. Next slide, please. And with that, questions, there's some references here. Those two references at the top lay out a summary of all the things that I discussed and the things that Tia discussed. And lastly, I'll leave you with another way that this could go positive. Maybe someday we won't have these type of activities based on what was supposedly a protest, which turned into an attempted murder. And with that, I'll stop and open the floor to questions.
I'll start it off. Tia, without sharing more than you're allowed and can, but I know when the various instances were happening, Lafayette Square and so forth, you were working, to say the least. Could you give some insight in terms of what's kind of happening behind the scenes when domestic disturbances like this occur, whether from a legal or just from a practical standpoint? What's going on that we would never be aware of, or at least the outside world wouldn't be aware of, if you don't mind?
Yeah, no, I actually think so. and Captain Sanders, you may actually know the name of the report, but a report just came out based on the investigation into what happened on the 6th. And I actually think it did a really good job explaining the back and forth that occurs, right? So for the Department of Defense to help, again, they need a request for assistance, RFA is what we call it, from a lead agency, either a governor, or if it's like the Secret Service or Department of Homeland Security. They need a request to come in. So, right, the Department of Defense is not going to just go out and do something without being requested to. So the requests will come in, and that'll come in actually via a paper. Like, it'll be a paper signed by the appropriate authority saying, hey, I have a request for this type of support. And that is all available. But what people don't really see is the back and forth that's going on between the requestor and the requestee. That being, this is how many people we need, this is where we need them. And they're kind of laying out the details as the request is being written a lot of times, so that we can ensure, when I say we, so that the Department of Defense can ensure it actually has the capabilities that are being requested, or it can provide advice on, okay, maybe you guys, or, you know, for the agency, maybe what you actually need is this versus that, or maybe we can do this versus that, or maybe we're not the right entity to actually support you in this mission. So those are the things that are kind of going on behind the scenes. The Department of Defense typically is going to know that a request is coming ahead of time, and they will actually start preparing for that mission, that being, okay, are we going to use Title 10, Title 32, our Title 32 personnel? What is actually the mission? How many people do we need? Where are they going to come from? Do we need to bring National Guard personnel from outside? For example, DC, right? We have to bring National Guard personnel into DC because the DC National Guard is actually very small. So there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of communication, honestly, that is occurring between, again, the requestor and the requestee before anything is actually signed.
And I'm going to add to that, because a lot of people are amazed that, you know, you deployed, I've deployed. And I always tell people in conversations that every battlefield you see, every operation you see, there's some lawyer somewhere behind the scenes, either on that battlefield itself or in some office helping direct that. And so when these things occur, what are you doing as a lawyer, or your staff? What are they actually doing in that process in the correspondence?
Right, you know, so once the request comes in, we're making sure that we can, that being the Department of Defense, can legally provide that support, right? So if it is going to be a law enforcement support and they're deciding on what status of personnel to use, we will tell them, hey, you cannot use Title 10 forces. So in the mission, you need to utilize National Guard forces. So we review the request and look at it from the legal perspective of, are we going to violate any law by helping in this way, or providing support? Another aspect that we actually look at is the funding piece and whether or not the Department of Defense will get reimbursed. There are multiple statutes that describe specifically what the Department of Defense can do based on what the mission is. And so that's what we always need first, is what's the mission, because the mission will drive the type of authorities that the Department of Defense will have to help out in some way. So that will be either in statutes or in the National Defense Authorization Act is also where we get a lot of our regulations on how we can help. So as a lawyer, I'm looking through the statutes, looking through the NDAA, and making sure that the mission can be accomplished just from the fact that can we do it, but then how are we doing it, and are we following the law in that regard? So, and everything goes through legal.
Got it. And there's a question, Dr. Sanders, I have a question for you, but I'm going to go and answer the question in chat. So what are the available avenues for declaring someone an insurrectionist? Must this be done only by the court system, or can it be accomplished through Congress or other administrative processes?
Well, Congress can pass any bill that they deem appropriate. Now, if it's asking for the president to take a certain action, the president has the ability, like he has in any other statute that's brought to his or her desk, someday her desk, to say, no, I'm going to not sign that, or to allow it to lay and have it become law effectively without a signature attached to it. Now, the statute is pretty specific. You don't have to actually be a successful insurrectionist. You just have to try it, or try to help someone else try it. And you can be designated as an insurrectionist under 10 U.S. Code, under 18 U.S. Code. So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, The primary way to do it is through our courts, but there are other avenues.
I don't want to steal our thunder. Like I said, we're going to do a more robust panel on this later on, most likely in the fall. But Dr. Sanders, you alluded to a little bit about the political side of this, right? Without going too deep, where does the line go between kind of what you guys are just briefed from the legal standpoint to where the political aspect comes in? Can you kind of hit upon that and the policy side of this?
Well, sure. So you're the governor of a state, and now you have a situation where your constituents, those people who voted you into office, are looking for you to resolve what may be a threat to life, limb, and property. You either fail or you succeed. Do you fail or succeed on your own, or do you need outside help to do one or the other? When you reach outside and ask for a third party to come do part of what is your job or what the people have elected you to do, you can be deemed now seen as a failure. That's a political thing. I don't want to give the other side of the Congress, the other side of the House, the Democrats, Republicans, whatever you are, ammunition to say that I'm ineffective. So politically, at the governor's level, that's going on. Now at the executive level, the president level, in the National Command Authority, do I force that governor's hand? Do I go over that governor's head? What are the political ramifications for those two actions? Or do I stand back with all the potential consequences and watch that governor fail? Fail for his people, fail for life, limb, and property. That's political. All of those decisions, as they're deciding whether or not, hey, how do we pay for it? What troops get used? Oh, okay. Can we actually mobilize enough people from this state? Do we have to call in other states to help us? That's all happening, and all of that is being leaned on by the political dynamic that is happening wherever this is going on.
And you mentioned, you mentioned, Dr. Sanders. I just want to put this in perspective for people, because we saw the protests at Lafayette Square. We've seen multiple protests, and you had a slide, I think around slide 16 or 15, that kind of historically looked at all the massacres related. We talk about domestic disturbances, but it's not lost on me, at least, that when you look at domestic disturbances, they often involve people of color, right? And so to bring this thing full circle, particularly for our NBA members here, but just lawyers in general, those who just want to understand the law, who want to support the rights of all Americans, regardless of what color you are, you have to understand the context of how these things have been utilized or threatened or whatever you want to call it over time. And so, a real example besides Lafayette Square, I was thinking about it when you said, oh, well, the governor might be incapacitated or can't ask for assistance. Well, you had a similar situation like that happen potentially in Michigan.
Right.
We had people that were arrested, indicted for potentially taking action against the governor. So let's say they did capture her. Let's say they did kill her. This easily could be invoked. This situation could arise. So we're not far. This is not a far-fetched situation that we're talking about. And again, it kind of illustrates why we're giving you guys this primer today, because these are real life situations that could happen any day out of the blue. Nobody would have thought January 6th would have happened, but it did. So again, as lawyers and just as citizens of America, we need to arm ourselves with the correct knowledge and understanding of these things so we know what to do. If you're a civil rights attorney and you're called in to support a protester, well, it's probably important for you to have some context of what these laws are about and what can and can't be done. And so again, that's why we're just explaining some of these things to you today.
So let me add a little context. So
Yeah.
in America, we have defined certain things in certain ways. In this 21st and now in the 19th century, a little bit less, but definitely 21st century going forward, a riot has taken on a new name, at least a new definition. And riots now are considered to be Black people acting up in a city, someplace, somewhere where the authorities didn't have to come and control it. That's not how this got going. The Boston Tea Party and the Boston Massacre are riots. So let's do our context. Let's understand context here. when you think about what happened in 1921, Bloody Summer, those were riots, but the context of those are white people just like Tulsa and all those other places on that map attacking Black people. That's the historical context of riot in America. It's been flipped on its head from the 60s going forward, 50s going forward, 1950s. But that's the historical context. So when we want to think about this and how it gets applied and who's going to do what, you didn't see an Insurrection Act invocation for any of those other events. That's also political because the victims were of color. As we move toward looking at what happened in the summer of 2020 and the deployment of National Guard forces for Black Lives Matter events versus the lack of deployment of National Guard forces for a rally on January 6th, and the violence that happened at one and didn't happen at the others, whether they go forward in the future and whether the Guard gets called up to do this protection of the nation for what event is a political decision as well as a tranquility in the United States under preamble decision.
Okay. I have another question here. You mentioned Northcom. It appears that on 9/11 that Northcom quickly scrambled F-15s in response. Those of you who don't know, Northcom is a combat command within the military. I'll just say it to keep it easy. However, on January 6th, and this is kind of what you were talking about, no active forces were activated in response to the insurrection, despite the oath to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Can you speak to the legal authorities to use active forces in domestic matters? For example, they listed the Fort Ord troops who were used to help quell the California riots. And it kind of talks about what you said, but I don't know if you want to elaborate any more on that, either one of you, on that question.
You want to start, Tia, and I'll jump in?
Yes, I say, right, the legal authority for the Department of Defense would be a national emergency declared by the president, the Insurrection Act, the Stafford Act declaration, again, by the president for a disaster relief. So the authorities exist, but then you go to the policy questions as to whether or not a president will or will not actually invoke those legal authorities to do something. So, you know, one thing that we always say as JAGs is we advise, but commanders decide. And our commander is who will make the decision whether or not to deploy the troops in any kind of given situation. And with that, Captain Saunders, I'll leave it to you to talk to the policy aspect or the political aspect of that.
So one of the things that came out about January 6th was an actual statement by someone who said, well, I'm concerned about the optics. So the optics of National Guard forces surrounding what was largely a white crowd, protesting the lack of election of their candidate on January 6th. The other side of the coin was during the summer of 2020, the optics of not having a National Guard or other military forces or large police presence around protesting African Americans and their allies was a same question, different folks, different answer.
Okay. I'm going to add, we're going to shut it down in a minute. There is one comment, I don't know if everybody can see it, but another aspect, referring back to when I asked Tia a question about kind of what's going on behind the scenes and what the lawyers are doing. It says our most senior attorneys are also looking at policy matters on whether and how and when to intervene or to provide the support requested in addition to the Black letter law and authorities. And I think that kind of sums up what Tia was saying. So with that said, I don't know if there's any more questions. If there are any, write them up now, please. But hopefully this kind of gave you just, again, we're just giving you a little snippet. You can see where this thing could head and it probably will head when we put on the full panel. And we plan to have media personalities and experts like Tia and Dr. Sanders and others. And so I suspect it'll be pretty robust and outstanding panel that we're preparing. But just want to kind of, lay this out for you. Get to know this. It doesn't matter whether you're a corporate lawyer, like I said, or a civil rights attorney. This matters. This matters to you, particularly as an MBA lawyer. And more importantly, just to highlight, you have the resources within your MBA miss to get the answers that you might need. All right. So I just want to thank you, Tia, for outstanding job, as well as Dr. Sanders for bringing your expertise. And hopefully this was enlightening. All I think I see one more comment. It says, in regards to January 6th, to not forget it was a rally, which were to intelligence clearly indicated would likely become violent, where the intelligence and not support that assessment for any BLM gatherings through the summer. So then again, you have some additional context. And Dr. Sanders, you can talk on it. Sound like you want to say something. Go ahead.
And even on the after facts of that. So there's been analysis of the Black Lives Matters activities for the entire summer and well into the year, and they were 97% peaceful. Facts speak for themselves. Now, when we look at the intelligence that was gathered on those, same process should have been happening. Same process should have happened for January the 6th. The difference was there was not a deployment, a robust deployment of folks to defend the nation, as there was when there wasn't a need for it during 2020. So the political aspect weighing in to the detriment of the nation, in my humble opinion, because now we have set up and demonstrated not only that we have an unequal and uneven structure, but your tranquility and my tranquility under the Constitution may be different. That's not the end state that we're seeking.
Any last parting words from anybody, either one of the panelists or anybody, before we move on? Okay, I think that's it. I do have one or two little notes from the section. I'm just going to put out an advertisement. Those of you who are in the ABA should be aware, but if not, our section is proud to announce the Joseph Hairston Law School Scholarship. We are awarding a $1,500 scholarship to the child of a veteran. And so those of you online, if you know a child of a veteran, we're looking for somebody hopefully with the GPA who's either about to start law school in the fall or is already in law school. We would love to have you submit an application. We've actually extended the deadline a little bit, so there's still time to get on. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, or it's on the NBA website. But we hope to award that pretty soon. So get your application. Is pretty easy, pretty basic, and hopefully, we'll be able to help somebody in law school. But with that said, just thank you again for your time. You can always reach out. I'll put our section email address in the chat while the Living Legends program is going on. So if you have any further questions or want to reach out, please do. And of course, you're always welcome to join our section, of course, as well as the NBA. But our section is not just made up of JAGs. Despite having 2 JAGs on here, we have corporate lawyers and all types of other types. We embrace and welcome everybody, because we need everybody, and we need everybody to be educated about things like we're talking about today, as well as all the other issues facing the military and their families. So again, thank you. Have a good evening from me, and I will turn it back over, I believe, to Sean to carry on the rest of the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and thank you to our panelists this evening for such an engaging program and a lot of very important information and very relevant to our region. Our region, is comprised, as Jamie indicated, of the states, where there should be a lot of people who work in organizations, that are supported by the military, and so it's very relevant to us. I don't know if there are any questions that people have about the region or about about membership in the region and getting on our listserv, but I want to make sure that you know that you can reach out to me at seanmcgruder@gmail.com. and let me know if you are interested or if you're not receiving some of our internal announcements. And let's see, I see a note. And also I see that Jamie has put in information about where you can reach him. I see comments, also saying that it was an excellent program and excellent information. Of course, we know, and Jamie has told us many times that this is a teaser, right? And that we are to look forward to additional information coming in the fall. I'm going to go over some information about our legend. I don't know whether President Hoffler will be coming back shortly, but I do want to share just some biographical information about the legend that we'll be honoring this evening, just so you'll know a little bit more about him. And David Green, who presently serves as the NBA's general counsel. He's a full professor at North Carolina Central School of Law. Professor Green was born in Bronx, New York. He earned his undergraduate degree in 1985 from Georgetown University. Congrats there. Okay, so with that, do we have any concluding remarks from President Hoffler?
Well, I just wanted to say, so I didn't see David Green. I just saw his picture, but I didn't see him. I didn't know if he was going to speak, but I just again wanted to say that I am so very honored to be able to have who I believe has been the best general counsel and that the NBA has ever seen. And I say that, you all probably know I was a general counsel of the National Bar Association. And even though I was a general counsel, David Green's service to this organization has been exemplary and extraordinary. So bravo to David for this accomplishment. And I'm so delighted that we're able to honor him in this way. I was listening to the panel, I was multitasking and because I wanted to make sure that I could hear. And thank you all so much for putting that together. I know that all of it is not recorded, but I have to tell you, it's recorded in my mind. And thank you so much for explaining things. What you did is you took what's happening in our world today and what we witnessed on January 6th, and you made it make sense on one level, based on what did or didn't transpire relative to the law enforcement and military presence that was there. And that is something, ladies and gentlemen, that I will say that is invaluable. And that's why, you know, it is our National Bar Association, because we explain to our community the significance of everything, even when there is such an insurrection, if you will. So thank you for that. Thank you for your courage every day. And Jamie, you know how you said, don't thank people for their service, help them as well and serve as well. And I did volunteer my services and my time, and I am going to help represent, actually, however you all tap into me. And I hope that others will follow suit, because I think that is how we thank best the men and women of this country who have served and continue to serve so honorably. So really, those are my concluding remarks. And also, Sean, I want to thank you again for putting together this lovely program. And we are so delighted to be able to honor Region 4 for its wonderful work and for its talent.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, with that said, I think that concludes the program for this evening. I want to thank everyone who was able to come and participate. Again, thanks to our panelists, thanks to our president, thanks to Jamie for his work and gathering such a wonderful, distinguished panel. And we look forward to a time when we're together again. And it hopefully, if nothing else, will be in July for the annual conference. Good night.